Hey friends, welcome back to the Mayhem Performance Podcast. This week we have a special guest. Ben Moore from Evo Performance Therapy is on site to talk all things dealing with injuries through CrossFit. You know, the reality is that all of us either deal with aches and pains or have serious setbacks where you're going to have to take some time off. And so we're bringing Ben on to talk through kind of the process that you take your athletes through, either if they're training through an injury or when to actually back off and go through a rehab process. So Ben, do you want to just introduce yourself, kind of what you do, and then we can dive into the topic?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, my name is Ben Moore. I'm a doctor of physical therapy, own Evo Performance Therapy. So we're a group of PTs and chiropractors based out of Nashville, Tennessee. We have a few clinics around the area. We specialize in working with active individuals in a performance-based setting. So it feels and looks a bit different than what you may envision with your typical physical therapy or chiropractic care. We really focus on performance, getting people up and moving. All of our clinicians have a background in some sort of strength and conditioning. Personally, my background's in CrossFit. I've been doing CrossFit since 2011, October of 2011, something like that. So, yeah, back in the day, man. I'm very old in CrossFit years. That's been the folks I started working with. I love working with that group. Been lucky enough to work with people of all ranges, games level athletes, games champions, all the way down to just like weekend warriors, folks just like us that like to get after it. So
yeah, Ben, I mean, I think everyone kind of would empathize with like, in the sport of CrossFit, the nature is high intensity. There's a lot of volume. And so all of us, I think every single one of my athletes at some point has had to deal with either just like a small ache or pain, maybe an overuse injury, or some have had serious setbacks, maybe a rotator cuff injury or, a labrum tear in their hip, whatever it may be. What's kind of the process that you use when you're taking an athlete on that maybe is just going through an ache and pain, and how they deal with that when they're training through, like, let's say the open is coming up and they're like, hey, I really want to make sure that I can perform well in the open or in quarterfinals, but I'm dealing with this nagging shoulder. Like, what's the assessment process you'll take them through?
It's a good question. I think getting someone's mind right around an injury and setting expectations is really important. I think it kind of depends on the age of the athlete too, right? So I think 25 seems to be the sweet spot where I talk to a lot of people that like they have their first injury and they kind of like freak out because like, what do I do? I don't know. Versus you talk to a master's athlete that's 40, 45, they're like,
I'm dealing with these all the time.
That shoulder hasn't worked in years. And so, I mean, I think, checking in with their mental state. Are they scared of the pain? Are they scared of what that means? Are they rushing out to get imaging and are they just trying to, I just can't do CrossFit anymore. I got to just shut it down. So setting expectations and framing, what is the meaning behind pain? And then, depending on the time of the season, where we're competing, is this their profession? Are they competing at the games? Is this the open for fun with their buddies? We really want to figure out the acuteness of the injury. And so typically things that are fairly acute, meaning they've happened very recently within a week or two, those can calm down quickly as long as we just don't make it mad. So let's say we're 2 weeks out from the open, they get a shoulder thing, maybe they tweak it on a snatch and they're like, I can't do anything with my shoulder. Super easy just to say, hey, let's just lay out that shoulder for a few days and it should calm back down, and let's just hit all of the other stuff. That's a bit different than I've had a shoulder thing for years and then I just flared it up again and now it's going to be months of work on it. So generally first step is figuring out how acute is this, and then that kind of guides the process from there.
I think that's the hardest part that I've had to deal with. I work with a lot of masters athletes, and you do have some that just pop up kind of to your point, like maybe they are doing a snatch and they just feel a little twinge in their shoulder. That's one thing. But most often you see athletes, especially as they kind of get older in the sport, they've done this for a long time. Maybe they did start in 2011 like you. So it's been 14 years of training. And since 2013, they've always kind of dealt on and off with maybe a shoulder issue. What is the difference for those two athletes? What are you telling the the athlete that comes in with acute pain versus those that have that long-term pain? Is it simply, hey, we're going to just lay off of this and kind of work around it for the athlete that just has a twinge versus the athlete that's had this long-term discomfort?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the time of year as well. I don't like telling people to just rest it. There's kind of that, stereotypical medical professional just saying oh, it hurts, I'll do this. Oh, don't do that. You don't need to be a professional to know that. People know that. They want to know how to fix it. And so if it's someone, say masters athletes had a long-standing issue and we're going into the off season, then that's when we're great, let's figure out what's actually causing the pain. What are the contributing factors? And let's actually fix the issue so that you don't have to deal with it going forward. And that's when we have the time and ability to do that. If we're going into the competitive season, then it's more like, all right, we have this thing coming up that we have to do. Let's just figure out how to work either around it or minimize damage. So we got to figure out what are the aggravating factors and only do those as necessary. So how can we load the area without really making it mad and incapacitating you? And so that may look like, all right, we know ring muscle ups and overhead squats are coming up in the open or whatever stage we're at. That's going to really test the shoulder. We may have some pain and soreness with that. Let's make sure we feel as good as we can going into it. So that may be relative rest of the area leading up to. We warm up, do the best we can, and then we try to recover it as best we can. So sometimes it's just damage control and limping along through a stage of competition. But when we have the space, then it's like, we got to actually fix this.
Yeah. For the athletes that are preparing for the Open right now, how would you distinguish between, hey, we're going to train through this and still test those movements? Because there are a lot of athletes that maybe we keep using the shoulder, but that's a common one, right? Mm-hmm. And the nature of the sport of CrossFit, a lot is overhead. Mm-hmm. And even if it's not overhead, you're still grabbing a barbell hanging from a pull-up rig, whatever it may be, that's impacting the shoulder. How do you distinguish between we're going to train through this right now or we're going to actually take a step back?
Yep. I like to use what I'll tell my clients like a stoplight system, kind of as like a framework for how to know what pain and how much pain is okay to push through. So if we look at like a scale of 1 to 10, 1 is like I can barely feel my symptoms. 10 is like we're going to the ER. Like you could chop my arm off and it won't hurt worse. Like I want to set those. A 1 or 2 out of 10 is like a green light. You're good. Like you're going to have some discomfort. That's totally fine. A 3 or 4 out of 10 is a yellow light. So we want to pause, maybe not add more. And if we hit a 5 out of 10 or higher during the session, we want to either shut it down or modify whatever the training is that day. So we need to change movements, change whatever the plan is. And that goes for during the session and for the following 24 hours. So if you're at like a 3 out of 10 during the session, but you wake up the next day and you're like a 7 out of 10, then the volume or intensity or both was a bit too high for that. And so effectively, if we can keep the pain manageable below a 5 out of 10 and then return back to baseline within 24 hours, we're okay to keep going.
How do you define that range for people whose range might be broken? Like myself, where it's like, you're like, hey, 1 to 10, you and I have talked about my hip with running recently. It's like, I don't know. I don't even know. Like, is it a 3? Is it a 4? Some people might call it a 6, 7, or is the point of that skill?
Wow, you just did the 6, 7 thing. My kids, shoot, yeah. I'm gonna have to show this to my kids now.
6, 7, 10, 11, something. That's what my son keeps singing.
Same.
We Googled it the other night real quick, quick digression, and it literally means nothing.
It means nothing.
That's the point of it, right? It's to confound us.
And now you're talking about
right?
it.
Yeah, here we are.
Yeah, just messing with all the parents.
Yeah. Is the purpose of it that it is subjective, that it's really more about how you're personally feeling?
Yeah, it is inherently subjective. So that is a limitation. I think there is value in self-awareness as an athlete. I think you need to know your body, be in tune with your pain signals, because at the end of the day, pain is a signal from our body that's requesting change. And if we're just blowing past it all the time and aren't able to gauge that with some level of consistency, I think that's an attribute of an experienced athlete. So I think that's worth developing instead of just someone saying, oh, my pain tolerance is too high, I can't do that. It's like, all right, well, let's work on that skill. Let's be more in tune with our bodies telling us. For someone like that, that's a very common response, especially with our active folks, is my pain tolerance is so high, I can't distinguish those levels. I usually say like a 5 out of 10 for me is like, I'm distracted from what I'm doing. Like if my back hurts at a 5 out of 10, like I'm going to be sitting here squirming around, like can't quite get comfortable. If it gets higher than that, maybe I can't really focus on the conversation I'm having. This is just constantly in the back of my mind. And then if it's less than a 5 out of 10, like I can function fine. I'm aware of this, but it's not limiting my daily activity.
And go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's a really good way to think about it, because I've had that conversation with athletes of like, okay, maybe somebody just feels it a little bit on a snatch, but it's not limiting their performance and they don't have any like lingering effects after the session. Meanwhile, I have athletes that report back, I couldn't sleep last night because if I rolled onto my right side, my shoulder was killing me. And so I had to lay on my back, but then it started hurting me there. So I laid on my left side and then it started hurting me there. That's a totally different discussion with those athletes.
Yeah, because now you're interfering with sleep, which is kind of one of the keystone habits of like, that makes everything worse. So at the end of the day, when we work with people, like pain's a part of life. Everyone has pain in some amount most times, especially as we age. Things are going to hurt whether we're active or not, whether we do CrossFit or not. When we work with people, it's because that pain is now limiting their ability to do something. Maybe that's play with their kids, get a good night's sleep, or snatch heavy, squat heavy, et cetera.
Sure. We've been throwing around the terms a lot, pain and injury. Can you differentiate for us, like define what is the difference between pain and injury so that we then can go, okay, well, how do we know when to train through it and how to train around it? How do you differentiate between those two for your clients?
I think that's a good thought exercise, because one thing they'll ask people when we talk through it is like, hey, who here is pain-free? And like no one raises their hand in a room. But then you ask who's receiving treatment for that pain, and like also not many people raise their hand. And so just because we have pain doesn't mean we're injured. I would classify injury. On the one hand, we can look at something and say there was an acute injury, there was some trauma and some structural change happened. I was bench pressing heavy. I felt a pop. I'm bruised. My pec rolled up. That's an injury, whether it hurts really bad or not. Like your pec is torn. Like that's a limitation. But more times than not, I classify it as like pain in such a way that you can't do something that's important to you. So now there is some functional limitation attached to the symptom. A symptom without a limitation, we just keep going. And we see people do that all the time. They train through things, whether they should or not, they just train through it. But if there is a functional limitation where they physically can't, or they're just miserable afterwards, I would call that an injury.
I want to kind of walk through, maybe distinguish those two things just real quick and give some like actionable tips for the audience. So let's just start with, someone has maybe some pain and they, even though they can still perform, they still can train, they're going after specific goals, they want to get out of that pain.
Yeah.
And so, hey, I have this shoulder thing that just kind of keeps nagging me anytime I do snatches. What's that process outside of just the rest that you talked about maybe for 24 hours? What are things that you're doing for that athlete to make sure that we can achieve kind of a pain-free training and pain-free life?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it starts with a good assessment. We need to know what we're working with. Like, what tissue are we dealing with? Because they're going to behave differently. Is this, for an example, if we're talking about a runner, is this like a tendon issue that needs load, or is this potentially a bone stress injury that does not need load?
Yeah.
Because we don't have a good assessment and we're treating a bone stress injury like a tendon, it's never going to get better and could be getting worse. So we assess it, figure out the tissues that are going on. I'd say second to that, we need to figure out contributing factors for that. Like, is this do they move perfectly and this is purely due to a volume and intensity issue? Is it due to an underfueling or under recovery issue? Is it a combination? But we got to figure out the secondary factors too. And that paints the picture of how do we address it. So if it's tendon related, we likely need to load it strategically and not irritate it. If we know that you're doing pretty good, we're gonna load your tendon, but you're also not eating enough. Let's make sure we're fueling properly, getting enough sleep. Typically, I would say if you are training and you have pain and it is consistently limiting you, and it's because a lot of times it's just gradual enough that it's not stopping them, but eventually they just start to plateau and they just reach a frustration point where they're just like, I have to change something. That's typically how I will think about it. As far as changing it, once we know the tissue involvement, the contributing factors, it's just creating a plan around that. So if we know we're doing something that aggravates it, stop doing that thing, find an alternative, and then let's throw into our accessory work, our warm-ups, the things to correct those compensation patterns, the contributing factors.
Yeah. What about for athletes who don't have immediate access to a physical therapist for the assessment portion? How do I know the difference? Like, if you're spending a lot of money because Brandon's your coach and he's really expensive, you pay what you get for it, right? I know that's a loaded question because you're like, man, I went to school for this. But what are some simple tips that you could give to them to try to begin to differentiate the source of their pain?
Yeah. And there's a lot of great resources online, like between all the AI models that are out there, between YouTube, you can get a general idea of like what's going on with enough like personal research. It's kind of like if you have no access to a mechanic, you could probably figure out how to change the oil in your car. Like it just would take probably a long time and you might mess something up, but you could probably get it done. Yeah. I think letting people trust their body is important because I think a lot of times people will give up all of their trust of what they're feeling and hand it over to a medical professional. And I think it's important to don't let go of that. Like you are in your body, you know what hurts. So if you're dealing with pain, you don't have access to someone to diagnose it. What makes it hurt. And if you don't know, just start paying attention, like maybe journal, when you feel really good, when you feel really bad, and start trying to notice trends. If you know that every time you do overhead squats, your shoulder hurts, or every time you front squat over a certain weight or over a certain number of reps, your knee starts to hurt, take note of that. And then now you know your aggravating factor. So we can start to shift around that. And you can also, if you are working with a coach, video yourself moving and say, oh, I didn't realize I had a major hip shift when I squat where I'm just really sitting into my right leg. maybe there's a strength imbalance. You can start to dig in from there.
Yeah, one of the things we've talked about in the past, especially when we do assessments with Mayhem Performance, is we spend a lot of time looking at what we call access, which is essentially like, do you have the range of motion that's needed to get into these positions? Overhead squat's a perfect example of that. You see a lot of athletes that are really limited, maybe ankle, knee, or hip, or just an overhead position, right? Their shoulders don't work correctly, and so it's really hard for them to get in these positions. So there are these leaning hard into your right side and then maybe rotating your thoracic spine to try to like get to the bottom of an overhead squat. And those compensation patterns may cause the pain that they're experiencing. So we try to spend a lot of time opening up those positions so that they can get into the position that's needed. And then the next step would be control, which is essentially, let's strengthen those new end ranges that you've gained so that you can perform the movement that you want to perform, especially in a sport that's so high intensity with a lot of volume. So what are the steps for you when you're kind of thinking through like, hey, do we need to get this person into a certain range, or is it more just strengthening the range that they have?
That's a good question. And that's pretty much the framework that I use with someone. And you can really get in the weeds of like nerding out on movement mechanics, mobility, stability, all of that. I believe that the body is really able to heal itself. And when we are having pain, there's just our body saying, hey, something's getting in the way of me allowing myself to heal. And so this is still piggybacking off your question a little bit. If you just kind of do a self-assessment or have your coach assess things, and if you just look and say, I know I struggle with overhead movements. I can't comfortably get in that position and breathe, or I can't get in the bottom of the squat and breathe. It feels very strained. Those are clues that we're probably missing something to allow us to get in there. Because if you can access all of your positions, you feel really strong in all those positions, and then we dial in all the lifestyle factors and we dial in your volume and intensity, that like your body will heal itself and you're going to be more likely to be pain-free in that. And so that's a really simplified version. And so then going into what you're saying, I use the same framework. If we can't get into a position, let's figure out why. So I'll look at basically as passive and active. And so we got to have both the access and the control in order to have functional range. And a lot of times you'll have things that present as tight that are actually weak. And that's where a good assessment comes in. So you need to have mobility before stability, because you can't strengthen a range of motion you don't have. So if you don't have access to a position, let's increase access. That's usually done with passive modalities, stretching, body work, mobility work, that kind of stuff. And then once you create that range, then strengthen that. That could be very isolated with cars, pails and rails, end range liftoffs, things like that, just isolated movements. Or it could be slowing things down. So if we're trying to improve our squat positioning, maybe we know we're missing some hip mobility or some ankle mobility, we'll mobilize those things, and then we go through the actual pattern we want. I tend to like to go mobilize, activate, integrate, mobilize the range we need, isolate and strengthen that end range, that strengthen the new position, and then integrate it into the movement pattern. So for the ankle, it may be open up the ankle range of motion, mobilize the joint, do soft tissue work on the calf. Then let's actually do some loaded ankle work. That could be maybe some sort of calf raise or a knee over toe split squat. And then maybe we're going through a front squat pattern. And that's the formula I found that works really well. Yeah,
that is a great formula. I'd highly encourage everyone. I think those that have an NPC coach, they're using that same formula. We have you, obviously, someone to lean on for looking and assessing those athletes, but it's also something that all of our coaches are doing for their athletes as well. The kind of going to the other side of it would be those that maybe have an injury. Like truly, you use the bench press example, like that's an extreme one, but like maybe they truly did injure themselves. What's the process for that athlete? Because we have some that maybe are in that stage right now, and now they're worried about their season that's coming up. Everyone wants to do the open and quarterfinals. What are you doing for that athlete?
Yeah. Again, going back and talking through like the mental aspect of it is really important. The body has physiological timelines that we have to respect. I think a lot of people they're like, oh, those don't apply to me. And, if we know that certain tissues take a certain amount of time. If you break a bone, it's going to take a certain amount of time to heal, period. And that applies to all tissues. So like, look at those, and that way you can get kind of a conservative measurement and an aggressive measurement, but you're not rupturing a tendon and somehow thinking you're going to be back in 4 weeks. You can have a clear expectation set there. From there, the process doesn't change that much. It's just we need to look at what tissue was injured, what are like actual healing timelines? So if you have surgery, like, 6 weeks for like an incision to heal, I've had people that have had a knee replacement and they're like, I'm 4 weeks in, why am I not better? I'm like, dog, your incision is still not all the way healed, let alone the bone and the hardware, and so it's just framing those expectations, respecting those healing timelines. And while the body is in that more delicate state, do other stuff. If you have a shoulder injury or a back injury, I think spine is tough because it tends to impact everything.
Sure.
And so if we take an extremity, a knee, a shoulder, an elbow, you have 3 other limbs and a core. You can still do a ton of stuff. And then within that, there's probably still movements that won't bother that one thing. With a back injury, it's one of the most common because it's just the most limiting and frustrating. Like from a conditioning standpoint, you still got your machines. A lot of you can still run. Like there's still single arm work, bodybuilding work. Like there's still a lot of stuff you can do. So still training as much as you can while respecting physiological healing. And once things are healed, then we go to our normal rehab process. We got to figure out what tissues, what needs to be strengthened, what needs to be loosened. And you just rinse and repeat that over a period of time.
Yeah. 2 quick thoughts. I think the first one is, and this kind of goes both to continuing to perform in training, but also the psychological side, which you mentioned. When you have an injury, I think, or this at least is my experience, I've gotten really down on myself and I get really frustrated and then I don't train. But like if it is a shoulder, I can do a ton of lower body stuff. I can do a lot of endurance based or aerobic work. And so if you're an athlete that's going through an injury or maybe even pain that is limiting you, there are still other things that you can do. And you can set different goals during that time as you recover the shoulder or as you get through that injury. So just keep that in mind. I think most people just kind of like shut it all down and they get frustrated and they get worse all the way around, as opposed to like, hey, I can still back squat, I can still front squat, I can still do all these other things and really drive up my 1RMs maybe with my lower body while I'm healing my upper body. So that's, I think, really important. And most people kind of forget that. I think I mentioned this the last time you were on the podcast, but one of the problems I had earlier on, I had a really bad injury with my leg snapped in half and my ankle was backwards. Like it was a gruesome football injury. But the reason I bring that up is the mistake that I made is I was so eager to get back that I rushed the recovery process. And so like I went through, we had a PT and, he helped me a ton, but then it was kind of like, I just kind of kept pushing myself on the side. I was doing stuff. I started running before I should have run, like didn't take care of my body. And then that next year coming back and playing football, I had all of these issues. Now it was not just my lower leg, that hip started bothering me. Then the right hip started bothering me, it was my left leg. And then my low back started bothering me because I was making all of these compensations because I didn't let it heal correctly. So what do you tell that athlete? And I say this because I know CrossFitters are like type A, they're goal oriented. They want to get back after it as soon as possible. How do you kind of slow that timeline down while still being aggressive to get them back to the playing field?
Yeah. That's a really tough one. And also, like I said, the age of the athlete depends. If you have a 20-year-old coming through that, it may be tough to tell, if you had told yourself back then, like, would you have listened? Because you're young and eager, you're a high level athlete. People just want to get back. I think I try to frame it in a way that feels meaningful to the person. And so if it is like a young, high level athlete that's just like, I don't have time for this, I got to keep going, helping them understand that like the veteran move is to respect your body's healing. Like you're not unique in that. Like you can't rush like what your body can do. Support it as much as you can and then control the other things. You can't bake a cake faster by turning the oven up to broil. You're just going to burn it.
Yeah. That's what I did, by the way.
Yeah. It's super common. And I get it because especially like if our identity is heavy into competitive CrossFit and that's really what makes us tick, feeling like that's been taken away is really, really challenging. And so, I think understanding that the best thing you can do is to give your body the time to heal and then control all of the other things, control the other controllables. So focus on, you rupture your Achilles, you're not going to be running for a little bit. So don't try. Like, let's get your bench press up. Let's get your handstand push-ups up. Let's get your pull-ups up or whatever it is that you're able to do.
Sure.
And then do all the other things too. And that's where everyone wants to jump straight to the training and like the exciting stuff, the mobility work, but like, let's use this time to dial in your sleep. Let's use this time to dial in your nutrition. Let's fix any other range of motion issues going on, which isn't exciting or fun. But if we're trying to take this seriously and be our best self, there's other areas we can improve.
Yeah. I always say bring the intensity to the other things that you can't control that time, right? Like maybe you're not being intense in your workouts, but you can still bring intensity to your sleep, to your nutrition, to whatever other or variables that you can control at that time. I think it's really important.
Are you seeing a shift now though, where maybe, what percentage of athletes do you see struggle with rushing it like Brandon did? And I have a similar story in football too, as well. And then athletes, even younger athletes, or older of any age group, where they're afraid to return back. And so they go too slow. Are you seeing that occurring more, or what percentage would you say? Or is that like still like on the margins or the minority of people?
Yeah, I mean, it can definitely happen. I think it's similar to like if we like coach a CrossFit class, we have people that are just like full send, I'm going to blow this thing up. And if I die in the process, like whatever, I'm going to get the fastest time. And then you have other people that like literally will never progress their lifts because they're so hyper focused on form. And you're like, it's okay, you can push a little harder. It's all right if it breaks down a little bit. They both exist. Yeah. And so, I think the mental return is really tough to be able to trust your body again. And so I think figuring out what the athlete is in that scenario and giving them ways to like collect wins in a controlled setting. And so if we're doing like return to sport, let's say we're doing higher level stuff before jumping back into a Metcon that demands that body part to work, let's make sure we've done our isolation work, our tempo work. Are we doing things maybe in a strength setting? Now, can we do it in an EMOM, maybe an EMOM with their heart rate up a little bit? So it's the same format we use to like for skill development and athlete development.
Can you run through an example like low back, right? Everybody, that's usually the biggest fear too, right? I tweaked my low back. I did it while I was deadlifting. Mm-hmm. Now I'm afraid to pull load off the floor. Walk us through or apply the deadlift to that progression that you just gave real quick.
For sure. Yes. I mean, like step one is like, can we get your range of motion back? Mm-hmm. Like, because you might be able to get back in deadlift comfortably and like still be missing a ton of range of motion, not be bracing properly. And you're just kind of duct taped together, which will eventually break again. So like get your range of motion back, get your ability to like load your back and it doesn't flare up on you. I tell folks too with low back stuff, if you can wake up in the morning and feel pretty darn good, that's usually a good sign that your back is getting to be in a pretty good place. And so we've done all of that. Now we're back to deadlifting. The first thing we may do, and let's assume that we've done our progressions. Now we can deadlift from the floor, full range of motion comfortably. Let's run some controlled like strength work. Maybe throw some tempo in there, up and down, so you can feel controlled and balanced throughout the movement. Once you can do that and challenge yourself at like an 8 out of 10 RPE, great. Let's take away the tempo. Let's do it a little faster. Once now you can deadlift full tempo at an 8 out of 10 RPE in a strength session. Awesome. Now let's go. All right. Maybe we hit 20 calories on the Echo bike and we're going into like 5 touch and go deadlifts. Rest to full recovery, do that for some sets. Now let's do it in an EMOM to where like maybe 15 cal Echo, 5 deadlifts at whatever weight is challenging. You do that for some sets. Once you got that, then you're probably ready to start throwing into an AMRAP or a rounds for time.
Yeah, it's fine. It's like you said, it's the same as like not even only skill development, but any movement development that we would progress somebody through. It's no different with returning back from injury.
Yeah, mechanics, consistency, intensity. Same thing applies with the rehab standpoint.
Yeah, I like, I don't Brandon, maybe you can help me articulate this a little bit too. I think for us, sometimes it's almost like, how do you coach somebody well without the PT side of things, right? Otherwise, like you said, it's like going to a mechanic. It's like Brandon and I have coached for so long. A lot of our coaching staff has. We've seen some of the common injuries flare up. Like, okay, you've got the tennis elbow or golfer's elbow. You've got the shoulder pain. You got the low back tweak. We've got patellar tendinopathy going on. Like we've seen some of the common ones. But sometimes it gets to the point where you're like, man, I've always used the analogy of like, hey, if I try to assess your injury when I'm not a PT, it's like me trying to throw a dart, but from further away than a PT would. Like I might hit it, right? Mm-hmm. And we might do the right stuff, but I might miss it. On the flip side, it's got to be challenging for you guys too, right? Where you're like, hey, we're assessing the injury. We're giving you protocols to improve in it, but we have no say over all the training that you're doing on a regular basis. You're like, I don't even know what my question is, Ben. It's more like, how frustrating is that for you guys? Like where it's like, the connection between, there's such a gap between all the, like everything that you just described, you're not actually writing that protocol for the individual, right? Like, so how do you give that to a person and make sure that they're doing the right things outside of meeting with you? Or how do you navigate that? Or maybe a better way is how important is that? It's almost a triad: athlete, coach, PT.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a collaborative effort. For folks, it kind of depends on what their scenario is. So I will say the line between like just good strength and conditioning and rehab is a very blurry gray line. Like it's all the same stuff. It's all human movement. It's all strength and conditioning principles. I would say like a lot of the PT stuff is just regressed so heavily and throwing in like some injury timelines and that kind of stuff. And then titrating that up to then at some point what we just call training. It's all the same. If someone has a coach, especially like a knowledgeable coach, like what you guys have at MPC, it makes our job a lot easier because then I can just say, hey, here's the deficits we found. Here's what we're working on. Here's the work I need them to get in this volume setting, this intensity setting. I'm going to let you just put it into their program. So it feels very seamless for the athlete. I think it's a huge benefit to where they don't feel like they're having to piecemeal it together. Or like, well, now I got to spend an hour on my rehab stuff my PT gave me. And they're doing freaking bird dogs for their warm up. And then they go on the training session in a different app and it's all disjointed. Being able to go to the coach and have that almost debrief meeting and then give that to someone is a much better experience for the athlete. For folks that don't have a coach, we'll just take over that arm of their programming if they're willing to do it. Now, something to be said if someone comes to us asking for help and then just like goes and blows themselves up outside of the session, then it's a conversation of like, what are we doing here? Like, do you want to get better?
Yeah, you guys are taking over some of the programming then too. You're like, hey, let me just write that progression out for you.
100%. Yeah. And I think that's the differentiator for us personally from like maybe your traditional PT where like maybe like you have to have that, like they don't teach you that stuff in PT school or chiropractic school. Right. They don't teach you how to coach the deadlift, coach this. Maybe some programs do, mine didn't. Teach you how to coach the squat, right progressions, regulate volume, and they don't teach you programming principles. And so you need to be able to take the rehab knowledge and marry it with the programming principles. Or if someone already has a coach that's doing that, you can just hand that off.
Do you think that's a huge miss in PT school? Like that should absolutely be incorporated. Like, I don't know how you do good PT based on everything that you've said so far without that.
Dude,
basic program design principles.
Yeah, man. Like I remember when they were like teaching us how to like lift something off the ground. It was like, you squat down to lift this box up. I was like, that's not how you pick up something heavy. And they had a couple talks. I think it is changing now. Yeah. I think a lot of the PT programs are evolving. You know, academia always lags behind like real world application. So I think it's getting better. But yeah, I think there is a huge problem of, you know, some PTs will come out of school and they're like, I'm a movement professional, I'm a PT. Meanwhile, you have a 20+ year veteran in the strength and conditioning community that I think could do a better job of rehabbing someone than a brand new grad at a PT school.
Yeah, I think it's so disjointed. This is more of a coaching in general, but we work with people sometimes. You're like, hey, I got a nutrition coach. I work with a chiropractor. I work with a PT. I've got an Oli coach. Can you coach me in the CrossFit stuff? And you're like, good night. You know, like none of these are working in conjunction with each other. It's all over the place. We've coached the people who get the PT protocols and it's like an hour. They're like, I don't have time for training. It's like, well, what are you doing? And then they send you the list and you're like, it's like you said, bird dogs for a half hour. And so, yeah, this is not a question, just pointing something out. The best experience I've ever had working with a physical therapist has been with Will recently. So Ben's brother, Will, as part of Evo PT. And he and I have been collaborating on Seth Stovall's programming. Yep. Seth had a back injury last year. We've been getting him back and he's been doing really well. And Will and I have been talking every week actually, which I didn't anticipate. We'll hop on a Google Meet for like 10, 15 minutes, sometimes just a phone call, and we'll look at the program together. And dude, I mean, that's been like a game changer for me because he thinks in a way that I don't think. I would honestly, in some ways, I'm more conservative. Mm-hmm. He's like, dude, give him this, push him here. Like actually, and I'm like, are you sure? And like, it's actually been a great collaboration. So, yeah, I guess that's a little bit of a plug for the way that we're doing things, coaching the whole person. But you even brought up the role of nutrition and sleep. And yeah, it's almost in any field in fitness now, whether it's rehabilitative with, physical therapy or coaching and strength conditioning. Like, how do you not try to marry all these different fields together?
I think it's best practices. And I think there's a lot of amazing PTs out there. And I think a lot of it's just like limitations in the model, right? If you're at a traditional insurance-based clinical model, right. You literally can't teach someone how to run a squat progression because insurance kicks them out before they get to that point. And they're like, oh, they're independent in their activities of daily living. They reach we're not covered anymore. So they only work with people who are in that very acute injured phase for like 6 weeks and they're out. Whereas we know like if something takes 12 to 16 weeks to actually heal, not only heal, but like get stronger and make the adaptations we need, that allows us and requires us to work with someone at a much higher level. If we want to work with CrossFitters and all we give them are like pelvic tilts and bird dogs, that's not going to help them deadlift 500 pounds. Like at a certain point, you got to get back.
Did you help Brooke with her elbow? Was that one of the
late stage? Yeah.
Okay. Late stage. What did the collaboration collaboration look like with, I don't know who she was working with coaching at the time. And
she was still proven at the time.
What did that collaboration look like for you? How did you navigate that? Or was it a lot of you grabbing some of the programming for that, or was it collaborating with the coach? What did that integration look like?
I don't think she mind saying,
maybe she wasn't a good example. Maybe you could use somebody else.
No, I think like games athletes, time of year can be a very different example depending on how we work with them. But effectively it's, once you get that initial early stage of like, you get your range of motion back, you're feeling pretty good, and it's time to reintroduce things. Like, how do we go about reintroducing rope climbs, legless rope climbs? How do we go back reintroducing snatching and those types of things? So she already had really solid groundwork done of that early stage rehab. My focus was to help keep symptoms under control while strategically reintroducing the higher level CrossFit movements. And it was essentially at the beginning of the season of whatever year that was, 2022 maybe. And it was like, hey, you're looking good, range of motion's great. We just haven't done a lot of the high level stuff. How do we talk about that? And so that's conversations with the coach, the programming, like, hey, I think we can try this. Let's try, and then debriefing afterwards. How did it feel? How many did we do? Okay, this is what we're probably ready for next time. If we did have a tweak, how can we navigate that? It's just, it's basically how do we get back to the higher level stuff at that point?
Yeah, that would be my encouragement to the listeners. Like, practical takeaway would be, man, if you have access to a PT, is find somebody, this is a plug for you, like Ben and Evo, or somebody around you who has program design knowledge, who can help, especially if you've had to remove something from your training protocol for a while, integrate it back into training following good program design principles. That to me is the biggest miss. And then also has an appreciation for, again, like the cliche term, and a holistic approach. Like, they're asking you how much you're sleeping, how you're managing your stress, like what's your nutrition look like, so on and so forth. So,
yeah. Ben, to kind of tie a bow on it, let's talk about the athlete, because this is selfish for me. I have a lot of athletes, especially in the masters community, that they maybe never have real injuries, but they are kind of experiencing just these, little aches and pains like we talked about at the beginning. So what do you do, or how are you coaching those athletes that maybe they're always, every other week, there's just a little thing that pops up? What are things that they can do in their training, the way that they warm up, cool down? Maybe it is nutrition and sleep. Like, what are just like 3 or 4 quick tips that you would give those athletes that they're starting to experience just a little bit of shoulder pain or a knee pain or whatever it may be, so that they can stay out of pain and train pain-free going into the season?
I think he's asking you how often you say, suck it up. Yeah, no, I'm just kidding.
That is fair. I think using that return to baseline model of like, does the discomfort you're experiencing, does it return to baseline within 24 hours? Does it get too out of control during the session? And if not, you're probably fine. Now, if it's gradually increasing and getting worse over time, then we need to dial it back. I think the biggest piece of advice, I'm going to lump myself into that category. I'm 37, but I've been CrossFitting for a long time, is you need to know your triggers, like know where your problem movements are at, and then also have some awareness as to what makes a session go really good. I know for me, if I have like a 3x3 heavy back squat and we're like 80-90%, I know that if I do not warm up, like almost over warm up, it might be a sucky session. If I'm not sweaty, out of breath, fully mobilized, done a bunch of lightweight squats before that, that's what it takes. I need to allot a longer period of time for that, because I know that's a problem movement for me. And so if you know where your mobility limitations are, you know your injury history, and you've had great sessions doing the triggering movements, keep a running tally and just know that you may need to warm up and spend more time there. And also keep track of like how often you can do those things. You may not be able to squat heavy 2-3 times a week. Yeah. You may have to squat heavy 1 day a week and then use other ways to strengthen that. Maybe it's more single leg work. Maybe it's using other, speed strength work and sled work and other ways to strengthen the legs. So I think knowing your triggers is the biggest thing.
Yeah. That's awesome. Ben, where can people find you if they want to sign up for a session, they want to see you in person? Can you give some information on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can follow us on Instagram. We're at evo.pt, website evoperformancetherapy.com. You can DM us on Instagram. We have a contact form you can fill out on our website. You can email us, front desk, evoperformancetherapy.com. You can text us, 615-266-5599. These are all different ways to get in touch with us.
Let me add something to that real quick. If you're a main performance client and you want to work with Evo, make sure to just drop in that, literally just say like on the website that you're an NPC athlete, and you'll get a discount to work with Ben and his team. Mm-hmm. And I would say this too, we get all of our athletes listen to this every week. And if you're an NPC athlete, the value of having somebody that your coach knows personally, and that there's good communication between the PT and the coach, like we've just been talking about. Again, I've experienced it a ton recently with working with Will very closely. It's a game changer. So I would highly recommend you keep things in house if you can. So
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.